welcome everyone. We're here today for the DSROI interview with Yeni Rosa Damayanti from Indonesia. We're really happy to have you with us, so thank you for being here. So Yeni, I wanted to begin, if you could just maybe tell us a little bit about your particular activism with your focus on supporting the rights of women and girls with psychosocial disabilities in Indonesia. If you could just give us a little bit of an overview of that work, and then maybe we can talk about what's at stake in Indonesia for women and girls with psychosocial disabilities.
Yeah, women and girls with psychosocial disability is definitely the most stigmatized, the most controlled, the most marginalized, with the assumption that we do not have any legal capacity, legally or informally, then we are in the weakest possible, position possible. So it's really hard, and Indonesia is a large country, so there are many women with psychosocial disability from different circumstances, these different social classes and economic classes, urban, rural, so it's hard to really talking about the condition of women with psychosocial disabilities in general as one unit, because each sector has their own particular problems. But there is one underlying, the hopelessness, the stigma, the control, and the barriers. It's all there for all different, different groups or subgroups of women with psychosocial disabilities. And of course, the lowest of the lowest are women with psychosocial disabilities who are put in the institutions, in which in Indonesia we have thousands of women with psychosocial disabilities who live in the institutions, deprived of liberty and totally deprived of everything in life, totally vulnerable without any chance of being monitored or being helped at all. So yeah, that's the condition. So it's different from groups to another groups, but the underlying helplessness and the stigma and everything is there.
Yeni, for folks who may not be familiar with the issue of legal capacity, could you contextualize that for us? What does that mean? What does that look like for women and girls with psychosocial disabilities?
Well, lack of legal capacity, be it formally or informally, means that you cannot decide for yourself. Everybody, somebody else will decide for you, because you are deemed to have no capacity to make any decision for your life. And because your lack of that capacity to decide, then your position is similar with children, actually, in which those who position themselves as your guardian decide everything for you. And another legal consequences, of course, that as you're deemed not well enough to take care of yourself, then other legal aspect of that also involve, for example, concerning inheritance, for example, including the right to raise your children, and including being forced into medication or being forced into mental institutions, for example, which is very often happen. And in Indonesia, we have both formal, which means legal guardianship, in which it gained through the court process by the judge decision. But we also, but most of the cases is informal guardianship, in which that people do not go to court. They do not think it is important to go to the court, but by just assume that you have mental illness, then it is automatically that you cannot decide for yourself. Then your guardian, in which your immediate family, will take all decision for you. And everybody accept that, including the government, including the law adopted too. For example, like the law on mental health, for example. In the law of mental health act, saying that a person can be admitted to mental hospital without their consent, as long as the family give their consent. They do not ask whether this family is their formal guardian. No need to prove. No need to prove that this person is decided by the court and by the judge as do not have legal capacity. So there is no formal letter saying that this person have no legal capacity. There is no formal letter that saying that he is or she is under guardianship. So no need for that. So as long as the family agree, then she can be admitted to the mental hospital. So yeah, I mean the informal guardianship is way more dangerous because there is no control at all, and everybody just accept that. No question asked. So you can just, somebody can just say that if you have mental illness, then they will put you to the institution without. If it's social care institution, they even do not ask for any diagnosis. It is enough by the family statement saying that, oh, I have my sister or my daughter has mental illness. I want you to take her to the institution. So they do not need any paper or whatsoever, as long as the family said, I want my family members to be taken away. So they will send somebody, not only one, groups of people to drag the girl or the woman into the institution. So that's the position of lack of legal capacity. Because if this happened to a person without psychosocial disability, if this happened to people who are not losing their legal capacity culturally, then the person can simply that you kidnap me, I'll sue you. But this is not happening to women and girls with psychosocial disability. I met many women in the institution, and they are there for years. And I asked why you don't go out, and they said that because the families still not agree for me to go out. That means that they've been there for years. If the family said that you stay there, they stay there, even for life. They cannot say that I want to go out by themselves. And even if they want to go out by themselves, if the family refuse to accept them, they do not have anywhere to go. I mean, the government has not yet any step or programs, to facilitate women and girls who came out of the institution. For example, like housing. For example, like cash transfer of food support. There is nothing. So yeah, it's very, very difficult position.
If I can ask a follow-up question, I think it's very interesting what you're saying, Yeni. because we often talk about guardianship regimes, but often, we think through only the lens of law. And we believe that, if there are laws, we may bring in, progressive standard setting, the problem will disappear. But clearly what you're highlighting, it is actually the informal sort of guardianship regimes and the way legal capacity operates in that cultural space, as you said it. I think that's much more insidious. And therefore, as people who are doing the advocacy, it's so important to not just think about, like, let's say, legal reform, and a progressive disability law. But I wanted to ask you, because you highlighted and talked about the invisibilization of women with psychosocial disabilities, it would be quite interesting to know that in Indonesia, within the mainstream disability movement, what have been the debates and challenges? I anticipate when these laws came in, for example, the Mental Health Care Act, which obviously continues to have not very progressive standards. What were those debates and compromises that were made that obviously meant the continued stigmatization and invisibilization of a disability community, because the larger disability community perhaps made some strategic decisions? Well, it'll be very interesting to know, because I know in an Indian context, we see these debates and these challenges play out. So I think it'll be interesting.
You mean the position? You mean the position of the discourse on psychosocial disability within the larger cross disability movement?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the hierarchy, if there is one.
And the hierarchy, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, keeping in mind it is going public. But I think it's important to surface some of these issues. So yeah, whatever you feel you want to share with us.
Yeah, well, at first we had kind of a rocky start at the beginning when we first joined the disability movement, because at first we are not seen as part of the disability movement, because this is quite a new concept. Only after we ratified CRPD in 2011, then psychosocial disability is officially under disability discourse, under disability law, under disability movement. So at first it's very hard. I mean, when they talk about psychosocial disability, they're more thinking about the intellectual disabilities, but not psychosocial disabilities. So we work hard we work hard in two things. We work hard to move away from the patient groups into a disability groups, from a recipient of psychiatrist advice and wisdom into the actor of our own and becoming an activist. And but we also work hard to be accepted and to be part of the disability movement. I mean, we work hard to push the issue of psychosocial disability into the central agenda of disability movement in Indonesia. I'm happy to say that I'm quite succeed, in pushing that issue, to be one of the central agenda of the disability movement in Indonesia. At the same time, also we work hard to push this issue not only within the disability movement, but also within the human rights movement in general, and also the women's movement in general. So basically we work hard to be part of the disability movement, and I'm happy to say that we are now fully accepted, and there are many people outside of us who talk about, say, like institutionalization and stuff. So it's not only me. And also we manage also to push this issue into the women movement, especially because of maybe Lisa, you remember when the main groups proposed Anti-Sexual Violence Act,
Yes.
in which
Yes.
one article in that act,
Yeah.
well, that proposed act talking about sexual violence and anti-sexual violence, and they categorize what is considered sexual violence, and one of things that they considered is forced contraception and forced sterilization, and they said that all kind of forced sterilization and all kind of contraception is a crime, except if it's conducted to women with psychosocial disabilities. That's a few years ago. I mean, we were shocked because the leader of the proposed act, the leader of the movement to propose this act to the House of Representatives was the Commissions Against Violence Against Women. National Commission on Violence Against Women. So this is a one.
So they were proposing that it's legal to forcibly sterilize women with psychosocial disabilities.
That was the only exception, where it's not violent.
One exception. They talk a lot. They talk a lot about disabilities. I mean, we were part of that in the beginning, trying to put our perspective in that, and well, they agree that, for example, like if the victim is person with disabilities, then there should be the sentence should be at like 1/3 or something like that. But then there is this one particular article. They know what, and they were very defensive about that at the time. Extremely defensive because well, when I ask why, I mean, how could you come to this conclusion? And they said because we think about the mothers, because the mothers will face difficulties, if the daughter keep on getting pregnant, etc., etc. And I asked, does it mean that according to you, only the mothers are women and the daughters not women? So it seems like the daughter, which is the women or girls with psychosocial disability, is not considered as women or girls by them, because they said we consider the mother. How about the daughter? And it is and this is very disturbing because the same thing happened with, for example, like victims of rapes. You still say that victims of rape cannot be sterilized, even though the mother asked, But why women with psychosocial disability has this exception? So that's what is interesting is that is not that debate we involve not only us, but we also involve women with disabilities groups, and also other disabilities also went to us, and we have dialogues, endless dialogues with the Commission Against Violence Against Women. And finally we managed to force them to withdraw that article from the draft after 1 year. So it took 1 year for them to withdraw the chapter, the article. Yeah. So, but yeah, that's they did that formally. I mean, they have like a formal announcements and release a formal letter that after this, we finally decided to withdraw the articles, which we received very happy and glad. But after that, I think after that, then we kind of get recognition, as part of the movement, and I think right now, we also managed to push one women with disability to be part of the National Commission of Women, Violence Against Women in last election, and things like that. So yeah, it's things good. But yeah, I mean, I think now we started to get recognition with them and also with other women organizations. Before, they see us more as as people that they will assist. Like you assist a community, you are their how do you call it? We call it dampingan in Indonesia. So people that you, people that you, they see us as their client, more like that,
Right.
as a
So
client.
without agency almost.
Yeah. So we are not fellow activists.
Right.
We were not.
Right.
They did not see us as fellow activists. They saw us as the victim that they have to help. Client or things like that. People that the victims that they need to help and to to encourage but not as fellow activists. And so yeah, we did several things. I think right now they still, I can sense that they still not that very comfortable, because probably they do not know how to act. For example, they still do not fully accept that we have a that we have like a double discrimination that makes our situation a little bit different from them. They do not yet see that the difficulties that we face as one of the priority that they need also to raise and fight for, So it's still, it's still going on, but it's very promising. So it's very promising. I think it's going to be improved a lot, in the future.
Yeni, I wanted to ask you about a little bit about two things. How widespread this control over women's reproductive health is in Indonesia for women with psychosocial disabilities. Basically, what I'm asking is how widespread is this practice of forced sterilization, forced contraception of women with psychosocial disabilities? And if it is widespread and socially, culturally accepted, why wouldn't that be seen as a priority within the women's movement in Indonesia? So two questions, basically.
Yeah, the forced contraception is happen quite sometimes, even though it's hard to investigate because they are very close in the institutions and in the mental institutions, in the mental hospitals. For example, like we managed to lobby the National Commission of Violence Against Women to conduct investigation in the social care institution, and they found out, after all of this fiasco, we managed to lobby them to did the investigation, and they found cases of not only forced contraception but forced sterilization in one hospitals in Central Java. Forced contraception is quite it's quite common, even though they are very, close about that. But when we talk with the residents, they say that we receive injection without they know what it's that. So there are two things that they used to do, which is the injection, and then another one is IUD. How do you call it? IUD?
IUD, yeah.
Yeah, IUD. And well, I talked to one of the director, but this is a bit long time ago, of one of the social care institution, and they said that they put IUD in women residents, and I asked, do you ask their permission? And they say they even do not know they put IUD in them. They said that it's just normal medical checkup, blah 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 blah, blah. And but it is very hard to investigate because social care institution in Indonesia is almost like concentration camp. Nobody really can interfere, to go there. So if we want to investigate, we really have to drag, for example, National Commission of Human Rights or the Ombudsman to come with us. But we found some evidence. There is another friend of mine who said that his sister was hospitalized in mental hospital, and the doctor asked the parents, would you like us to put IUD in your daughter? So they asked the parents, not the women. And I asked one, so did your parents agree with that? No, thankfully no. But really, did the doctor really ask the parents about would you like us to put IUD? Yes, they did. I went, what? So it happened. It's hard to do the investigation, but my planning is to persuade the NHRI, to conduct a serious investigation on this issue.
One of the things I think, Jenny, you see it very rampant in India, both in institutions but also families. And I think it stems from two things. One is, if you can't stop the violence, then at least you stop a pregnancy, right? I mean, so I think it's also the state saying that here are women who are probably more vulnerable. And we know this from data, that women with disabilities face higher levels of violence. So here are governments, institutions saying, we can't do anything about the violence, but we can at least prevent the person from getting pregnant, no? And I think it's also kind of, in a way, I think it hides the kind of abuse within institutions, because, how does one then link it back to the kind of violence that's kind of institutional and systemic within these sort of spaces? I was just thinking, and it's so curious that the women's movement, which was thinking about a whole law on violence, didn't make that connection, right, to the larger issues of violence, to this issue of forced contraception, and thought that was the exception they could make to their standards. So it's quite interesting, how within the women's movement, we've been so muddled in our thinking when it came to violence against women with disabilities and making these connections. So
it's good that after the whole fiasco about the article in the Anti-Sexual Violence Act, I managed to lobby them to conduct their own investigation. If you do not believe me, just go, and see what is happening in the situation. And they did, and they released their report. So it's good, and they show interest also. They show interest also to continue with this with this issue. We just conducted like introductory CRPD training, like just 2 days training for women organization, women service providers for victims of violence, including several commissioners of National Commission Violence Against Women as participants. And this is a CRPD training that focusing on the situation of women and girls with psychosocial disability, and the response is quite good. I mean, many women organizations interested to join, even the commissioners of the National Commission of Women Violence Against Women. And yeah, I mean, one of the results that they agree to continue, they agree to make a new programs, you know, on the institutionalization of women in the institution, women with psychosocial disabilities in general, and etc. etc. So I think it's good. It's good. Also, you know, outside of that one particular article, we really need this anti-sexual violence act, you know, to protect, because we are very vulnerable. We are extremely vulnerable. So we need that. We need that that act. So we after we finish, you know, after they withdraw that troublesome article, then we you know, we also put our energy and attention to advocate for that law. We went to the parliament. We met with several political parties, saying that us as women with disabilities, we need this, we endorse this, and we want this to be ratified. The problem is that right now, the proposal of this Anti-Sexual Violence Act was opposed very, very strongly with the hardcore Muslim groups.
Mm-hmm.
And as everywhere in the world, it seems like there is an uprising of the hardcore religious groups in Indonesia as well. So they said that this Anti-Sexual Violence Act is liberal, feminist, Western, etc., 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 is not according to the Islamic norm, etc., etc. So now we are facing down, and actually, in that sense, because the disability movement themselves is not yet seen as feminist movement, you know. Mm-hmm. It is we are in quite how do you call it? We are in quite actually strategic position to lobby for this act without, you know, automatically being labeled as, oh, you know, Western feminist, liberal, etc., etc., etc. So I think that's good. That's good. Yeah. And but there is another thing that we need to do in Indonesia, is because this is two ways. It's not only us trying to influence the women's movement, but it's also us trying to influence the disability movement themselves. Because the disability movement in Indonesia in general is very new with the concept of, you know, women and gender. It's very new because actually the disability movement in Indonesia used to be very, very unpolitical, apolitical, since only maybe not too long ago, actually, maybe 10 years ago, 12 years ago. So during the era in which there are so many gender trainings all over Indonesia, during early 20s. We missed that. Nobody, no one. We have thousands of trainings, gender trainings at the time, but nobody invited any women with disabilities in that trainings. Not at all. So women with disabilities kind of like lag behind, during the talking about the perspective as women. So we also have to work on that. So we conducted several trainings, gender trainings, etc., etc. One of the proof that we still really have to work within our own movement. For example, like domestic violence, which is one of the core issues of women movement, is not yet openly discussed and taught within women with disabilities. They still see domestic violence, for example, as a shame to the family, and not to talk about openly, etc., etc. So we work both ways. I mean, we have to work with the women movement, but we have to also work hard to educate, the women with disabilities in Indonesia. I mean, because we lost the big wave of women movement during the early 20s. The early 2000s. I mean, early 2000s Indonesia is like a huge movement of women. Late 90s, early 2000, huge. We have thousands of trainings, all over Indonesia, but they overlook women with disabilities. I never see any women with disabilities being invited in even one of those trainings. Completely left behind.
So Jenny, you've sort of answered one of my last questions, but what you've been talking about is your work, the tactics and strategies that you've used to visibilize the issues of women and girls with psychosocial disabilities, both in the women's movement, but also in the disability movement. And you're talking also about, for women with disabilities themselves, getting that awareness, that empowerment, understanding women's rights, and having been left out of the wave of trainings that happened, needing that to catch up.
Yes.
But if you could talk also just a little bit about what other things are needed, what other strategies, in your opinion, are needed to move forward, knowing that women with disabilities need this gender training, they need that empowerment, knowing that there's a lot of work to be done within the two movements. If you could just talk about what do we do to move forward? What are your suggestions for how to make sure that the rights of women and girls with psychosocial disabilities are on the agenda, and that we are breaking these systemic forms of violence that are taking place in institutions, but also in the home?
To move forward, that's a complicated question, because there are many factors that involve, in the move forward of things. But well, one of the things that we cannot do that alone. We have to do that as part of the disability movement. That's the most important thing. And we have to of course we have to equip ourselves with knowledge, both CRPD and CEDAW, etc., etc. Because the more you know about your rights, the more you know about, the more knowledge you have, then the more confident that you are. So to move forward right now is dealing with the government is one of the challenge that we face, because many things is really depends on the government policy on that. I mean, if we cannot push forward the advocacy for the institutionalization, for example, we cannot really free women from the institution, and we have to. I mean, it means that we have to address many issues to move forward. We have to address the rights to housing, for example. We have to address the right to works, because in Indonesia there's a lot of discrimination and stigma for women and girls with psychosocial disability to go to job. We have to show a psychiatric certificate that saying that we do not have any mental illness, in order if you want to go to a formal job in company or in the government, for example. So we have to deal with many issues. We have to identify the barriers that we face, that we have right now, and addressing that barriers one by one, and hopefully not by us, but together with other disability movement, because it is really hard if we work just by ourselves, but as part of the bigger movement, we have a better chance. And of course, we need to keep being one of the leaders, amongst the cross disability movement, because to ensure that our agenda is always there, to be taken as common agenda among us. So yeah, I mean, we have to educate ourselves and equip ourselves with knowledge, conducted training, CRPD, and gender, have a lot of discussion, and then we have to identify the barriers that we still have, and we have to address the barriers one by one, including dealing with the government. But we also have to, we cannot forget also peer-to-peer support amongst each other. And yeah, I mean, that's what the things that I think we need forward.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely complex, and there's a lot of things at play, for sure.
Yeah.
But I think that what you've done to visibilize this issue, to expose the institutions, but to also get the women's movement on board with that is huge.
Yeah, yeah. I try to. We succeed to get women groups to show interest in that, and I'm very happy that I mean, in our CRPD short training, the commissioners themselves even becoming the participants, and when they talk about they started to talk about women and disabilities. For example, like 2 days ago, they have this FGD to talk about women with disabilities, and this is the really the first time that they really did that, and they put the issue of institutionalization into one of the crown issue. And also the how do you call it, the national preventive mechanism that consisted of NHRI that have obligation to check detention center or place that like detention center. They also put execution as part of the things
Okay.
that they need to watch, they need to monitor. And also the National Commission of Human Rights also put a lot of attention to this, including the Ministry of Law also. So they now, I think there are more people who are interested in this, including disability, the non-psychosocial disability groups. I mean, disability groups from other disabilities also started to get interest in that. So I heard, for example, in discussion, it's not only us that raise the issue of institution, but other people from other disability groups also raise this issue. So I think that's really good.
Yeah, that's great to hear.
Yes.
And I think what's fantastic to hear from you, and it's a really important message, what you've done obviously very successfully, is change the rules of engagement. So you invited the women's rights activists into the disability, because, you know, for so long, it's been such a power imbalanced relationship.
Yes.
I think that's such an important tactical strategy, Yenny. And I think the other big takeaway I feel, particularly for all the participants who are going to watch it, is how you strategically and consistently engaged with human rights mechanisms, engaged with the national commissions, and began to influence their agenda on these issues. So I think those are really important kind of ways for people to also understand how they could begin to do some of the work that they might be interested to do once they kind of re-engage back, you know, in their communities and organizations. So yeah, but Lisa, should we?
Yeah, just and one other final tactic that I think is really interesting is whether it was intentional or not, but getting this on the agenda within the disability movement so that other disability groups are advocating themselves for the rights of persons with psychosocial disabilities, and that sort of collective voice, rather than I'm here to talk about my specific group and my identity only, but rather we're talking in solidarity across disability groups. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, even other groups outside of us, you know, they start to have their own investigation on legal capacity.
Wow.
Yeah, there's another there's a DPO which is not psychosocial disabilities that started to do research on the legal capacity, which we're very happy to hear about that. And there's legal aid, which is not disability organization, also conducted the research on legal capacity. So yeah, this is very good that they are
fantastic. Really fantastic.
It's wonderful to hear. I mean, the issues obviously are not wonderful, but it's wonderful to hear that these tactics are starting to work.
Yeah.
So Yenny, we really want to thank you.
You need to be very noisy though. Like really, you know, push the issue inside. You know, in Indonesia, we operate through WhatsApp groups. So we all, I mean, we have WhatsApp groups, and some WhatsApp groups is we communicate, we strategize, we share information, we discuss and everything through these WhatsApp groups, and we have to be very consistent and to make sure that our issues is not forgotten.
Well, congratulations on the work, and I know how hard you've worked to get this on the agenda. And just wanting to thank you again for the time today. This has been a really fantastic conversation. I think it's going to be really insightful for the participants listening. So thank you for sharing your wisdom and your experiences.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you, Yenny. It's been a pleasure. It's been really wonderful. And it'll be a great conversation for the participants to also be able to listen to.
Definitely.
Yeah, I have a great time talking to you guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And wishing you lots of luck going forward, and let's stay in touch.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Yanni. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, Yanni.
Bye. Thank you.